Chapter 4. Sean was awakened by the sound of a bullfrog calling out into the fresh morning air. He stirred for a moment, then checked his phone. It was about 8:15, and Sean knew what that meant. It meant that he had missed the first time out fishing. Sean insisted on bringing his own tent this time, to which his dad responded, "Can you get yourself up in the morning then?" Now he knew that he wouldn't be hearing the end of it when he got back. Sean always hated sleeping in tents, and he especially hated getting dressed inside them in the morning. No matter how big the tent was, it always seemed like you still didn't have enough room. He struggled to get everything on and then stepped outside. Sean's arm tensed up when he realized how cold it was. He immediately reached back into the tent to put on the hoodie he had worn out there yesterday. The first thing they did when they got out into the deeper parts of the lake was fill the collapsible water jug. The water in those lakes was so free of human interaction and pollution that you could pretty much drink it straight, as long as you got it from the middle of the lake. Once they got closer to shore, they would use the water purifier, because that's where the wildlife came to drink. They always camped out on the same thin peninsula that stretched out into the water close to where the river connects their lake to all the other Boundary Waters lakes. It took about an hour or so to paddle from the drop-off point to the peninsula, or a little more if they were going against the wind. Tall pines stretched all the way down the peninsula from the main shoreline, which was mostly made up of solid rock covered in a thick, spongy layer of pine needles and leaves. Sean walked into the trees a little ways to pee. He pushed the low-hanging branches of the pines away from his face, flinching when one would snap back, spraying him with the cold morning dew that had soaked it. He could feel an all-new bug bite on the back of his neck, courtesy of the buzzing tent intruders he had last night. It didn't make any sense to him because the bug spray he had bought a week before had 100% DEET, or so the bottle claimed. He must have missed a spot. Either that or the little pricks were starting to evolve to near invulnerability. Sean hated the feeling of bug spray on his body as he was about to go to bed. It just felt nasty, like a big sheet of plastic wrap was covering his entire body. He began wetting his hands in the dew from the branches and rubbing the water down his arms to wash off what he could of the spray. The chill of the water helped soothe the itches of the bites as well, temporarily at least. It felt like it was working, but just then Sean saw something on the ground that he had not seen in a long time. Owl pellets. Or at least that's what it looked like to him. Sean hadn't seen owl pellets in years, so he wasn't exactly sure what to look for. He knelt down and began poking through it with a small twig. Yep, sure enough, there were bones. Tiny little mouse bones that flaked out of the nasty mold-looking material that made up the rest of the pellet. Sean stood back up and took a deep breath in the misty morning air. He could see his dad way out on the lake through the thin fog that blanketed the surface of the water. It was a quiet, serene image that brought a certain amount of stillness to Sean's troubled mind. It seemed to quiet every voice that had been tormenting his thoughts for the last year, and brought a feeling of control to him. Not a control that he had over his stress, but a control that this moment had over it. With a quiet whisper, it demonstrated its power over the turmoil, silencing it for the first time in a long while. Sean stood still, and a small shiver ran down his spine. He could feel his eyes begin to water for no real reason. He was just standing there, probably looking like some kind of zombie staring into the glazed horizon. He turned to make his way through the thick grove of pine branches so that he could hide to relieve himself. It was a coincidental morning, the reason being that on a morning exactly like this one, Sean, along with both his father and brother, had seen a moose walking into the water only a few feet from where Sean was now standing. It was a moment that they would all remember for years to come. A moment when there was no hellish existence of trying to mend everything that was broken single-handedly. Only the bliss of childhood ignorance and the dumbfounded joy that naturally came with it. If he had seen the moose before his dad, he wouldn't have been able to contain his childlike excitement. He would have run as fast as he could, jumping and waving his arms to tell his father what he had seen. Then he would have grabbed his arm and pulled him all the way there, outrunning every step his dad would be taking. Trey would have followed also, confused but excited. Sean's whole childhood life was summed up in exactly that instinct. Always ready to show his dad what new task he had accomplished or incredible thing he had seen or heard. Always seeking his father's approval, and Sam would generally give it. Things were quite different now. For every quality he had once admired about Sam, there was now also a scar that was showing, a weakness. It was like once he and Trey no longer needed rearing, Sam let everything fall apart. Sean did not blame his dad entirely for what had happened, but did he believe that he had fought hard and tried everything to stop it? No, and Sean knew this was the truth. The ground was so quiet. The spongy floor of fallen pine needles and bark absorbed every sound, even from Sean's heavy footsteps. He moved steadily as he started back to the campsite, his still, heavy eyes adjusting to the gloom from underneath the branches. Thin, bright beams of sunlight were now beginning to cut through the fog that had swollen higher into the sky from the ground, as if the earth itself was exhaling after a long night. As Sean took another step, he couldn't help but admire the beauty of the sunbeams above him. He even stopped walking to stare at them for a moment. He turned slowly and followed them down with his eyes. Then he saw it. For a moment he didn't. In fact, he almost turned back around without even noticing it. But after his eyes picked it out from the thick woods behind, he realized what was watching him from the beauty of the grove. The moose calf stared at him silently from the shadows, the beams of sunlight barely lighting certain spots on its small, curiously twitching ears. For a few seconds that in the moment seemed like an eternity, Sean and the calf stared into each other's eyes. Sean's feelings went straight from fear to a gleeful excitement, then back to fear again when he realized that a moose calf would not have wandered far from its mother, the ever-dangerous cow. The moments in between the fear, however, were peaceful, and for some reason Sean felt like, for the first time in a long while, another living thing was looking at him with understanding. It was like the calf was telling Sean that everything was going to be okay, that the dream Sean had a week before meant nothing, and that eventually his siblings would stop being so angry and realize that they needed to keep their relationship with both parents strong. It was strange, but it was those feelings that suddenly flooded Sean's mind as he and the calf examined each other. Years before, Sean would have run back to the campsite, beating branches away from his face as he ran. He would have yelled for his dad to bring the canoe back to shore so they could both see the calf, and then maybe look for its mother. Then Sam would have told him once again about how the female moose is the most dangerous one. Not this time, though. This time, Sean took in the scene as if there was no one else in his life at that moment, no one he wanted to talk to, because really, there was no one he was excited to tell those kinds of things to anymore. "Where were you this morning?" Sam asked as Sean walked back into the clearing of the campsite. He bent down to pull the canoe further onto the shore until the nose of the boat was nearly touching the fire pit. "Sorry," Sean answered. "I guess the road trip caught up with me." "If you want me to wake you up in the morning, let me know," Sam said, reaching into the canoe and pulling out a string line with a few fat walleye on it. A silvery glow shimmered off their dying eyes, like shiny quarters tossed into a city fountain. Sean didn't know if his dad was hinting at him not being responsible enough to wake up with that comment. It seemed innocent enough, but he knew from statements in the past that Sam didn't approve of the way Sean and Trey slept in on their days off. Sam was always up early, and the boy's tendency to wake up late in the mornings was yet another reminder to him of how many habits they had inherited from Deborah. "No, I'll be fine tomorrow morning," Sean replied, reaching into the canoe to help unload the tackle box. "Leave it," his dad said, waving his hand. "I'm gonna go back out soon, I think. Just came in for another cup of coffee." Sean could see the steaming metal coffee pot sitting on the smoldering ashes of the fire. He walked over to the fire to grab a cup. Sean wasn't much of a coffee drinker, preferring highly carbonated energy drinks usually, but on this chilly, moist morning, coffee actually sounded amazing. "Watch your step," his dad said, pointing at the ground in front of Sean. Down on the ground, right in front of Sean's left hiking boot, was a small toad. It didn't even lift its head, as if it was completely ignorant of the impending doom from Sean's foot. "Gotta be careful on the shoreline," Sam went on. "Those suckers are pretty much invisible." Sean looked up and noticed what had to be dozens of the small amphibians gathering along the shoreline of the lake like they were readying themselves for some sort of religious ceremony. "What are they doing?" he asked, stepping away from the toad he had almost squashed. "They crawl up from the middle of the peninsula. They know that the mosquitoes are everywhere at dawn. It's like a buffet line. I've told you this before, I think." Sean thought for a moment. He had, he realized. "Oh, yeah, I guess I forgot." Sean was good at that. Forgetting things, or pretending to listen to people while they were talking, was definitely in his top 5 skills. It was the thing that annoyed Naomi most of all while they were dating. This was a fact Sean repeated over and over again in his mind to, in a way, justify his decision to end it with her. Although deep down, he knew that breaking up with her was probably the stupidest thing he had ever done. No one cared more for Sean than Naomi, or at least that's what it seemed like. She was always letting him decide where they would eat or what movie they would see, always curious about his likes and dislikes. Her greatest strength to him, though, was that she listened. She listened when he really needed someone to listen, which was extremely necessary for him this past year. The unfortunate thing about Naomi is that she was also a fixer. When she was listening to Sean, he loved it, but he also knew that in her brain she was always trying to solve everything he told her. She could never really figure out that he just needed to vent to someone sometimes, because he felt like he would literally go insane if he didn't. This became a problem for both of them one night when Sean's mom invited them over to have dinner with her and Courtney. The night started out fine, sure enough. Everyone was having an okay time, and the conversation generally revolved around Sean's work. Deborah told him that she felt like she never got to see him anymore, though, and asked about Sam. "He's fine," Sean said, hoping to say nothing more on the subject. "Have you met him yet?" Deborah asked, turning to Naomi. "Yeah," she said, looking back down at her food as she impaled a small carrot on the end of her fork. "That's usually where we meet before we go anywhere." Deborah also looked down at her food. She smiled slightly, gently tracing a piece of lettuce on her plate with the end of her fork. It was a smile Sean recognized. It meant that there were turbulent waters ahead. Time to abandon ship. "You know," she said, "you guys could meet here every now and then." Sean chewed on his mouthful of pot roast loudly. The chewing sounds were louder in his head than could be heard by anyone else, and that was his goal. He was trying to drown out the sounds of the conversation that was sure to follow. It wasn't working out so good. Where was a bag of potato chips when he needed them? Sean was passive enough to where he would just nod his head to a comment like that from his mom, possibly responding with a quiet, "Yeah, Mom, maybe sometime." But he knew that Naomi was not that kind of person. "I could make you guys something to eat," Deborah went on, "and Lord knows that I would enjoy the company." Naomi looked over at Courtney awkwardly, who didn't even notice. She was reading a text message on her phone, seemingly not paying attention to the conversation. "Can't be too bad," Naomi said, as pleasantly as she could. Every time I come here, Courtney and Trey are usually here." Deborah put her fork down. "Abandoned ship. Come on, just abandoned ship." "Well, yes, but it would be nice to see all of my kids every now and then," she said, her small smile slowly becoming a straight line. Sean looked at Naomi. He knew what was coming next, and he almost couldn't watch. Why did she care about this? It's not like it was her family. Why not get out before she, too, got sucked into the black hole of Sean's family turbulence? "Well, I mean," Naomi responded, still with a hint of cheeriness, "Sam hasn't really seen them all either. Usually it's just Sean over there." "Shut up," Sean thought. "Naomi, please shut your mouth." Deborah looked like someone had walked into her own home and smacked her right across the face. It was the harsh truth, and she knew it was. It's a sick, twisted monster, divorce is. What Sean had found out over the last year was that it was not really about the two parties trying to be treated as fairly as the other. It was now about punishing the other person, beating them down however they could until they only had themselves left, lonely in the dark. Sean realized that when two people separate, they could travel to the ends of the earth and surround themselves with as many other people as possible, but that other person will always be with them in some way. They would never be rid of each other, and Sean felt like he would be a part of it until the end of days. The night evolved into a state of complete tension as Deborah tried to explain, in as nice a way as she could, that the situation is a lot different than Naomi would understand. She mentioned briefly that Sean was acting one-sided and a little biased towards his dad, while Naomi tried to tell her that Sean was only trying to make Sam feel included in the family somehow. Sean tried to ignore most of the conversation, turning towards Courtney and trying to talk to her about her family. Courtney, however, was paying more attention to the heated battle at the other end of the table, so it was pointless. Everything eventually cooled down, and the time had come for Sean and Naomi to leave. But after Naomi walked outside, Deborah grabbed the sleeve of Sean's jacket and gently pulled him aside. "Honey," she said quietly, "how long are you going out with her?" "What? Why are you asking me that?" "She doesn't seem like a good fit for you. I think you need to figure out where you want to go with your life. And if you stay with her, I think you will be making a mistake that could come back to bite you. If you're mad about what happened at dinner, then you need to know that she is just uncomfortable with this situation." "That doesn't have anything to do with that," she said, letting go of his sleeve. "I just know that I've been in a couple relationships, and I think you will be making a mistake if you stay with her. Don't lead the poor girl on." What Sean said next even surprised him. He was usually so passive, but the discussion over dinner had filled him with such raw emotion, he just sort of blurted the words out. It was like they had been building over the last hour and had finally received permission to erupt. "Well, no offense, but I think you might be the last person I take relationship advice from, Mom, so don't worry about it," he said, his voice uncontrollably rising a little, similar to how his dad sometimes did. "I'll figure all this out on my own." Without a word, Deborah let him go. She watched their car disappear down the road and went back inside to help Courtney clean up the table. Later that night, Sean and Naomi went to their mutual friend Kyle's house to play video games and just hang out. Kyle had two big TVs sitting right next to each other in his basement. He had invited them and another of Sean's friends, Zach, over to play a game of Nazi zombies after they got done at Deborah's house. It was a mini-game that took place in World War II, where zombies were coming for you and you had to kill as many of them as possible before they eventually killed you. Sean was good at it, but not as good as Kyle or Zach. Neither of them had girlfriends, so most of their time was spent at home every night playing that freaking game, and on that particular night, Sean found himself a little envious over that fact. Zach worked at a vinyl shop, so he could design any kind of sticker he wanted on the computer and print it. so he and Sean designed a sticker where cartoon versions of them both were standing side by side shooting at a cartoon zombie who coincidentally resembled Kyle. They had put the sticker on the wall just behind one of the TVs a couple weeks before and were still waiting on Kyle to notice. Kyle was somewhat of a conspiracy nut, always watching weird videos on YouTube about the government's latest plans to enslave the human race or whatever. So anything that Sean and Zach could do to make him more paranoid about anything was always funny. "Did you find the box yet?" Zach asked, staring intently at the glowing TV screen. "No, yes, just found it," Sean said excitedly. They were all taking turns since the game would only allow 2 players at a time. Every time one round ended, the person with the lowest number of kills had to give up his controller to the next player. "What's the box?" Naomi asked, sitting on the top of the couch behind them. "It's this box that gives you a different gun when you find it," Sean explained. "That's cool. Can you choose which gun you want?" "No, it's random," Kyle said, sipping the big cup of gas station soda he had bought earlier on his way home from school. "Every now and then you get something really good that can kill a bunch of them, but most of the time it screws you." "Have you really never played this before?" Zach asked her. "I mean, I've watched Sean play before," she said, "but I don't remember anything about a magic gun-giving box." "By the way, Kyle," Zach interjected, "what are your thoughts on all those people getting sick overseas?" A small smile crossed over the bottom of Sean's face. He knew where Zach was going with that, poking the bear. "It's like I've been telling you, Zach," Kyle said as he blew another approaching zombie away. "It's the government's secret society." "Come on, man. You're telling me that you think the government is making people sick in 6 different countries?" "They are more than capable, dude," Kyle replied quickly. "If they can manufacture gasoline without oil to sell to us civilians, I'm telling you." "So this is the government's way of turning us all into reptilians?" Zach said as he put his foot up on the coffee table. Zach and Naomi both laughed as Zach put the end of his rifle to the head of an approaching zombie and blew it clean off of his shoulders. "No, seriously, guys," Kyle said. "Something weird is happening. I saw it on the news the other day. People are getting sick everywhere over there, and now they're saying it's in California." "What?" Zach replied. "Yeah, I saw that too," Sean said, killing another zombie. "That's crazy," Naomi said. "I guess that means I'll have to worry about you getting sick on your trip next week then, huh?" Sean's next sentence would be the one he would regret since that night. The nail in the coffin, so to speak. "We'll just add it to the list of unnecessary things you already worry about for me," Sean said softly under the sound of artificial gunfire. "What?" Naomi asked, with a perplexed wrinkle forming on her forehead. "What do you mean?" "Nothing really," he said. But after only a brief pause, he went on. "I just think you worry a little too much about my life, you know?" "No, like, how so?" "Well, like tonight, for example," he explained without taking his eyes off the TV screen. "I don't know why you had to bring up the fact that I'm always at Dad's all the time to my mom. You should have just let it be." "Okay, first of all, I'm not really worried about you," she responded in a half-joking tone, which was probably because they were with friends and she didn't want to create too much of a scene for their sake. "And second, your mom needs to realize that she is putting you in an awkward situation with you and your dad." "Yeah, but that's my mom." "What's your point?" she said, getting frustrated that he wouldn't even turn around to talk to her. "I'm just saying that I guess I'm just saying, why would you even put yourself in the middle of it? I mean, it has nothing to do with you. Why wouldn't you just smile and agree with her?" "Huh," she scoffed. "Well, okay." Neither of them had noticed the fact that Zach had completely stopped playing the game and was now staring at Sean and Naomi quietly while still holding the controller. His character on the screen was now being completely dismembered by hordes of zombies, but he didn't even notice. Kyle, on the other hand, was now on his phone scrolling through the pictures on his phone's gallery. He didn't have any bars in the basement, but was searching for anything to distract him from Sean and his girlfriend's first argument he had ever heard. "You know," Naomi said next, an uncomfortable choke in her voice, I forgot that I told my parents I'd be home by now. She jumped off the back of the couch and threw her purse over her shoulder. She walked up the stairs and out the garage door of Kyle's house. The last thing that she heard was Kyle's voice from downstairs. "By the way, Zach," he said, putting his phone back in his pocket, "I don't really think that illness is from the government." "Oh yeah," Zach said. "Why is that?" "Because they aren't ready to take over yet," Kyle replied. "When the reptilians are ready, they will reveal themselves." "Well, how about you reveal yourself up to the TV?" Sean said. "Naomi left her soda up on the shelf behind it. Hand it to me and I'll throw it away." "You guys just wait," he said, getting up from the couch. "Soon you will see things my way." "Hey, what the—" Sean and Zach both looked at each other and smiled. Who put that there?" Kyle demanded as he pulled Zach's sticker off the back of the TV. Sean stayed at Kyle's house most of that night. They laughed and played more Nazi zombies, then they ordered a pizza. No one mentioned Naomi or Sean's argument with her. In fact, they did all they could not to bring it up at all. Although the night was filled with laughter, some of the last laughter Sean would hear for a while, all he could think about was how he had left things with Naomi. He told himself he would call her in the morning. Morning, however, came and went. He told himself he would call her that night, but then that night turned into the next morning. The conversation on the couch would, in fact, be the last time he spoke to her at all. This was detrimental to him in ways he could not yet understand. Sean had now lost his backbone. Naomi was strong in the areas where Sean was weak. He was passive, she was forceful. He was fine wherever he was. She was always looking to better the situation. It was a good partnership, but now it was over. Throughout the following week, Sean thought about what had happened, often paralleling it to his parents. He could see similarities in how he handled the situation to how his father would have handled the situation, and that haunted him. In fact, it was just about all he could think of at work the next week. He examined his behavior and how it paralleled his dad's behavior. It made him remember the first time he really heard his parents fight. Well, in actuality, he had heard them fight many times before, but this time was different. This time they really fought. This time was the first time where Sean thought that they might actually be over. It happened when he was in high school still, probably only a freshman in fact, long before Naomi, and long before anything was really wrong. Sean was happy then. No responsibilities except for mowing the lawn, and everything was fine. Those days were gone, though, and with them a childhood innocence that his parents seemed to steal away from him early. Everything was finally finished after his first year of college when Sean had gone to work for his uncle's company. He didn't have a problem with school really, and he got pretty good grades in high school. He just didn't care for college or the college experience at all. Plus, he felt like working a physically demanding job helped occupy his mind. It temporarily relieved him of the problems in his life, which is why he always jumped at the opportunity to work overtime whenever it was offered, whether he realized it or not. This time, though, it wasn't working. No matter what work he was doing, and no matter what songs he tried to distract himself with in his headphones, he found his thoughts continuously drifting back to Naomi. He didn't know why, though. All along, he thought that she would be happier somewhere else, with someone who didn't have so much family drama going on. He knew this from the get-go, and yet he knew that he had messed up. He knew that he missed her, but there was nothing really that he could do about it. If he texted her, he would just be dragging her back into something he knew he didn't want her to be a part of. At the same time, though, that familiar voice that he had tried to suppress before was now speaking to him even louder and more noticeable than it had been the night of Sam and Trey's big fight in the garage. He could have just decided to be with Naomi and leave his family drama behind him once and for all. It seemed like such a selfish thought, and yet it was massively appealing to him. After all, why not? They had their chance and they screwed it up. Why shouldn't Sean make his own life for himself and be happy without letting the mistakes of his parents drag him into the mud as well? "It's quite the day out there," Sam said as he and Sean packed up the canoe that afternoon to head out for an evening of hauling in walleye and pike. "Yeah, it's weird," Sean said. "It's foggy, but kind of sunny at the same time." "Yep, you can just barely see the sun over it," his dad replied, looking out at the horizon. "Look at it. It's like a giant blanket covering the trees." They finished putting the last of the gear into the boat, and Sam gave the order to shove off. Sean hated pushing the canoe off of the bank because he always seemed to lose his balance and either almost fall over the side of the canoe and into the lake, or he would accidentally drag his boot into the water as he pulled himself in, soaking his sock. Wet socks were the worst feeling in the world on a cold camping trip. Well, besides the feeling of bug spray all over you. This time he pushed the canoe off the bank as carefully as he could. He felt the toe of his boot sink into the spongy muck on the shore. Then, as the canoe lunged into the water, he carefully pulled himself aboard. He was a little disappointed in himself when he saw that the toe of his hiking boot was indeed wet when he pulled it in, but it had missed his sock, and that was the important thing. "Where do you think?" his dad said, pushing against the dark water with the paddle. Sean was trying to remember where he had caught an enormous crappie years before. He knew that it was south of the peninsula that they had called home every year, but that was all he really remembered, besides the fact that he knew there was a giant tree stump near it also. Sean liked catching crappie almost as much as pike, mainly because they don't have any teeth like pike and walleye do, so they are easy to take off the lure. That, and he thought they tasted better as well. "Let's head south," Sean replied. "I'd like to catch another big crappie." "Yeah, that one you caught that one time was a pretty good size," his dad replied as he pushed against the water again. "Although there was one I caught back in Illinois that might have been bigger." Of course there was. Sean could never have the biggest fish or biggest deer, not while the great one-upper was around. Sean remembered about 2 years before when he had shot his first deer. It was a nice big buck, and Sean had killed it with one shot. He remembered his hands shaking so bad that he could barely dial his dad on the phone to bring a trailer so they could haul it home. Trey was there already. He had been hunting the other stand that they had on Sam's property. It took them 20 minutes just to drag the behemoth deer out of the woods. It was about 32 degrees that morning, but by the time they had finished hauling the buck out of the woods, both he and Trey had shed most of their warm hunting clothing. After they lay there for a while, both smiling giant smiles of glee for the deer that they both knew was magnificent, they heard the truck coming down the edge of the field with the trailer. Both Sam and Deborah had come, and Sean remembered the only congratulating statement coming from her. His dad's face when he saw the deer was emotionless, not happy or sad. He said, "Good," a couple of times as Sean told him about the hunt, but the only other time he spoke was when he told them to hurry up and load it in so that he could get back to his tree stand. He had never congratulated Sean about the buck. The biggest buck Sam had ever shot was a 10-pointer. Sean's was 11. Sean had chosen to ignore the details of that day. He was too happy at that moment to think on how his dad had acted. It was childish, competitive. In fact, the only times he could remember his dad congratulating him on anything was when he did worse than Sam at something. If Sam reeled in a 7-pound pike and Sean brought in a 5-pounder, Sam would tell him, "Hey now, that is a really nice fish, my boy. Good job." Though Sean knew he was never really happy for him. He chose not to think about this any longer, though, as they paddled closer to the shores of the vast lake, searching for fishing hotspots. Sean felt the spray of his dad's paddle as he switched to paddle on the other side of the canoe. The water was so cold that it stung for a moment, but he ignored it, merely closing his eyes every time his dad switched sides so that the water would miss them. "What did you think about out there?" Sean said, pointing to a small cove that had revealed itself through the evening fog. Sam looked at the cove, analyzing it. Sean waited for a moment to hear his expert opinion, but to his surprise it never came. "Yeah, I like it," Sam simply agreed, steering the canoe towards the cove. Sean thought that his dad would rattle on about how the cove was a bad area for fish because of this or that, so he was astonished when he agreed. There was no reason for him to disagree, though, really, so maybe he shouldn't have been so surprised. Maybe he was focusing too much on his dad's faults lately, and it was starting to affect his judgment in a negative way. Or maybe Sam had finally begun to realize that maybe he wasn't treating everyone else so great after all. Either way, Sean was suddenly a little happy. He stared at the cove as his dad paddled them towards it. It was small and inviting, almost cozy actually. The gray fog surrounded it like a pair of giant hands holding it in quiet serenity, all on its own, apart from the rest of the lake. A soothing, calm feeling came over him as they approached, but it was quickly interrupted as Sean realized something. He strained his eyes against the gray and black backdrop of the trees surrounding the cove, and was slightly disturbed at the thing he was now aware of. It made itself known subtly at first, blending in with the grayness of the cove, but was slowly becoming clearer the closer they approached. In the haze, Sean could see something. At first he wasn't sure if it was alive. Possibly a thin dead birch tree sticking out from the rest of the forest like a sore thumb because of its unusual white color. But then he realized that it was moving. It moved slowly, every now and then passing behind a tree and disappearing from view, but suddenly it would return and make its way further down the shore. To Sean, the thing almost looked like a woman, but they were still too far to be sure. The pale figure seemed to be without clothes on that cold evening as it walked steadily down the bank. Then it turned slightly, and it stared directly at their approaching canoe. A strange feeling swept over Sean as he observed the being. Something was off about it. Something was wrong.